True Consequences is a true crime and mystery podcast with stories based in New Mexico and the American Desert Southwest. I'm your host, Eric Carter-Landin. Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. I am currently working on Season 5 of True Consequences, as Season 4 just wrapped up, and I have to say I am excited but also a little bit overwhelmed because I was going to do a mini-series about the Dylan Redwine case, and I realized that I have so much content and so much information that I probably will get a full season out of it. So Season 5 will be a series about Dylan Redwine. And if you may remember, I did cover the case briefly with TZ Borden from Tapes from the Darkside. He's a really good friend of mine. He's got a great show with great production. He does incredible research, and he has asked me to share this small clip of his new season of Tapes from the Darkside with you. So as soon as I'm done with all the housekeeping stuff, I'm going to go ahead and play that for you. And hopefully you'll run over to his show and give him a subscribe, maybe a 5-star review. I also need to say thanks to everybody who has been supporting me. I would like to start off by thanking Sweet Vicious and Raylene K. I'd also like to thank Susan Baird. I'd like to thank Missy so much for being patron subscribers. Your support of me and this show means so much to me and makes it possible for me to continue creating. So thank you so much for that. And finally, I'd like to thank the people who have bought me a coffee on ko-fi.com/trueconsequences. Karen Vega, Jessica Campione, Chrissy Benson, Linda Inget, Gretchen Stevens, Stevie Lee Kanuick, Mackenzie Graysick, Cecile Glee, Amanda Delatorre, Melissa Fitzgerald, Rachel, Mackenzie Check. Thank you all so much for supporting True Consequences. You help make this show possible. Without you, I wouldn't be able to do it. So thank you very much. Again, if you want to support this show, go to patreon.com/trueconsequences or ko-fi.com/trueconsequences. More information about the show can be found at trueconsequences.com. And if you're on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at True Consequences Pod and on Twitter at TrueConsPod. Okay, that's enough of me blabbing. I look forward to seeing you in early 2022 when I start looking into the case of Dylan Redwine. I'd also like to point out that TZ did cover this case, so give the show a listen, let him know I sent you, and don't forget to subscribe.
Thank you to Eric for featuring our show on the True Consequences feed. My name is TZ and I'm the host and creator of a show called Tapes from the Darkside. We cover bizarre and lesser-known true crime cases. Each season we take one story and investigate in depth. And in our newest season, Season 4, we go to Australia to have a look at what was once possibly the most famous case in the country, but one that, with the passing of time, has been somewhat forgotten. Back in the early 1960s, the body of a scientist was found on New Year's Day near a river in Sydney, dead and half naked. Just a few feet away from him was the also partially nude body of one of his colleagues' wives. The scientist was neatly covered with a strip of carpet, and the woman was also covered with a few folded beer cartons. They were surrounded by vomit and excrement, and there was sign of some kind of struggle. But, curiously, there were no cuts, no stab marks or bruises on any of the bodies. And the subsequent test for poison came up negative across the board. This mystery would perplex the country of Australia and the citizens of Sydney for decades to come. But now, we think we have an answer. This is Tapes from the Darkside Season 4, The Mysterious Death of the Scientist and His Mistress. The following is an abridged clip from Episode 1.
Tapes from the Darkside contains descriptions of violence and sexuality. Listener discretion is advised.
Annual New Year's Eve parties were an event that the friends of Ken and Ruth Nash always looked forward to. The parties themselves weren't extravagant, but the Nashes prided themselves on inviting an eclectic group each year to ensure the evening wasn't only fun and celebratory, but also intellectually stimulating. The Nashes lived in the suburb of Chatswood, on the leafy upmarket Lower Shore area of Sydney, Australia. If you're like me and know little of Australian geography, if you imagine Australia as a round blob somewhere in the Pacific, then Sydney is on the southeasternmost tip. It's the most populous city in the country, and at the time it was home to an estimated 2 million people, less than half of what it is today. Ken Nash was a talented photographer, and he worked as a senior technical officer at the CSIRO. We'll be referring to this often, so be aware that CSIRO is an acronym, as you may have guessed, standing for the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization. That's a very long term for what is similar to, say, the National Science Foundation in the US. The CSIRO is basically responsible for scientific research across Australia, and it's fair to say that the Nashes surrounded themselves socially with people who had a broad range of intellectual and artistic interests. The invitation to the couple's New Year's Eve party to see out 1962 advised a start time of 9 p.m. Throughout the evening, a select group of around 20 guests mingled, laughed, and danced the night away, continuing well after midnight and into the early morning hours. By the time the last guest had departed, dawn was breaking over the horizon and through the trees. It had been another successful soiree, and everyone stumbled home to collapse into their beds for some much-needed rest. The next morning, at around 8 a.m., New Year's Day, 1963, a teen boy in the nearby suburb of Lane Cove was on his way to meet a friend at the 17th hole of the nearby Chatswood golf course to look for golf balls. He walked through the bushland flanking the Lane Cove River, which is a tidal estuary running through the Lane Cove National Park. This river eventually leads into the Parramatta River, which comes from the western suburbs, flowing into the picturesque Sydney Harbor. As the boy made his way to the golf course, he saw a man dressed in a suit lying face down on a grassy section of the riverbank. Being New Year's Day, the boy assumed that the man had passed out and was perhaps sleeping off the excesses of the previous night. But when the boy and his friend were returning home together around the same route an hour later, the man was still there. As the pair ventured closer, they saw the man's face was blue. The friends ran to a kiosk in the national park where they alerted the owner, who accompanied the boys back to the scene. The older man immediately knew he was looking at a dead body. The proprietor returned to the kiosk and alerted the police, calling them at 10:10 a.m. When police arrived at the scene, they noticed something curious. At first glance, the man appeared to be dressed in a shirt, tie, socks, and shoes. But upon closer inspection, the man's suit jacket and trousers had been laid over the top of his body. It appeared he was fully dressed when he was, in fact, half naked. According to the Sydney Morning Herald newspaper, his face had darkened to a deep purple, and blood trickled from his right nostril. His mouth was shut, but his eyes eerily remained open. Underneath the man's jacket, but on top of his shirt, lay a neatly cut piece of muddy carpet, measuring 3 feet by 2 feet wide, or 90 by 60 centimeters. Human vomit and excrement were found not far from the body. At that time of the morning, it was a low tide on the river, In the exposed edges of the bed closer to the water were where officers found discarded items of clothing, including underwear and a pair of shoes. When police checked the man's ID found in one of his pockets, he was identified as 38-year-old scientist, Dr. Gilbert Bogle.
TZ Borden from Tapes from the Darkside. He's a really good friend of mine. He's got a great show with great production. He does incredible research. Give the show a listen, let him know I sent you, and don't forget to subscribe. All right, folks, I can't wait to talk to you again. Thanks for listening, and stay safe, New Mexico. Thanks for listening to True Consequences. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at True Consequences Pod, and on Twitter at TrueConsPod. True Consequences is listener supported. If you'd like to support this one-man show, please go to patreon.com/trueconsequences. Thanks for listening, and stay safe, New Mexico.